I will guess that you've had the same experience that I have had, where the pandemic has strained relationships that felt extremely solid beforehand, but it has also forged a tremendous number of very high quality connections with people who have extraordinary capacities and who amplify each other's humanity. That's been the silver lining for, I think, many of us, is that we have met so many high quality, courageous, insightful people, yourself among them, in my case.
Thank you.
And so that's a very powerful force. I hear you saying that maybe the troubling authoritarian mass, that it could be rational in the sense that it creates this reaction that's very high quality. I think they are both rational. And, one of the things that's hard to see evolutionarily is we tend to think, well, what is the best strategy? And the point is, well, you've got strategies and counter strategies. And, I have written on my notes here, mass versus anti-mass, because there is something about the process of the people who do appear to have resisted the madness and to have shown such strength of character that has some of the same characteristics, right? We have scratched our itch in a very different way, but nonetheless, the camaraderie, in your description, it is the terror of loneliness and the inability to interpret the world that drives people to scratch that itch by signing on to a nonsense story that gives the promise of some kind of salvation. And that thing created a world in which some of us became obsessed with making sense from actual evidence, difficult as that is, and it created a camaraderie of a different kind. So basically the point is, everybody's looking for camaraderie, and there are a couple different paths. One of them is easy and very dangerous. The other is, dangerous to the individual at an extraordinary level, but nonetheless does bring you in the same kind of contact. And it is very reassuring to discover that there are others, for example.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I think that there is, or we should watch out that we do not become a real mass just because there is I think the most important distinction between sound and fruitful group formation and a mass formation is that in a group, in a good group formation, there is on the one hand a certain bond between the individual and the collective, but also the bonds between individuals are strong, and there is a real solidarity between the individuals as well. And I think that I discovered many new friendships during the crisis, and in my experience, it existed of really strong bonds between the individuals. I don't think that I started to form a mass with other people. Look, when you and me are talking now, we can have a different opinion.
Yes, I was just going to say this. Yes. That's how we know this isn't a mass.
Yes, that's how we know this isn't a mass.
We haven't agreed on some abstraction. Even, if we were going to, right, the group of people that we are now mutually in contact with have resonated with mass formation as an idea, and we have seen it move around. So if there was an idea that we were all going to sign on to and not notice, that there was an incompleteness here or a paradox there, that would be it. But you're right, we're not doing that. And that is, maybe that's the check that we need to know that we are not in a mass is, are we holding each other's feet to the fire or not? Right. And I don't want to be part of any group that isn't willing to honorably hold each other's feet to the fire. For one thing, that's how we make sense. That's the whole point of the endeavor, right? We will freeze ourselves in place with a narrative that isn't true if we don't pressure test it and challenge each other.
Indeed, yes. But I think suddenly it seems to me to be a very attractive idea or a very attractive question. Like, indeed, on the one hand, we could say that from a rational point of view, the smartest choice is to go along with the masses and to feel protected by the masses. On the other hand, we could also say, no, it's the other way around. It's better to belong to the small group, because if you do the right thing as a small group, if you stick to your ethical principles, you will go through this fast process of evolution, which has been described by many people, and which maybe is the real destiny of the human being, to become an ethically aware human being with an enlightened mind. And yeah.
Perfect. And, you know, I keep trying to explain to people who, you know, as I'm sure happens with you, people will come up and they will say, you're very brave. I admire you, this, that, and the other. I try to explain this situation left no choice. I literally do not know how I would have done the other thing, right? I wouldn't have been able to stand it for 5 minutes. And so it is that which, you know, it does rob it of a certain amount of courage. I didn't have a choice. I didn't make the choice to do this. It just simply was the only thing that was tolerable. But it does raise this other question. One of the things I saw 2 mass formations in a row, right? There's the mass formation around woke ideology, which did the same thing. It created a group of people who came together from very different perspectives, battled the irrationality of the claims, and it was a wonderful chapter. Then when COVID came, it shocked me, because it took the group of people who had formed this anti-mass to the woke ideology, and it divided it. Some of the people who saw right through the woke ideology fell right in line with the I call them medically woke, right? It's equally irrational, and yet and they've demonstrated the capacity to see through irrational things and the courage to do it. And yet in this case, something about this story was in their blind spot. I can't understand it. Maybe you do. Why is it that people who have resistance to this in one context don't have resistance in another?
Yes, I think that the emergence of the woke culture in our society was like a preparatory phase for the large mass formations that still have to come. Because in my opinion, the Corona crisis was the first real mass formation, because it has this baffling characteristic that it split all the existing groups in 2. That's the signature of a real mass formation. It is energetically so strong that it reorganizes the entire social structure. Once one real mass formation emerged in society, very often a second one and a third one and a fourth one follows, just because the mass formation recreates the conditions that made it emerge. Mass formation started on the basis of loneliness and disconnectedness, but the mass formation itself leads to even much more disconnectedness and loneliness. While it seems to do the opposite in the beginning, it destroys the social bond further. And after a mass formation, there is even more lonely people, more disconnected people, which very often makes that a second mass formation and a third one emerges shortly after the first one ceased to or disappeared a little bit in the background. So I believe that the phenomenon is very well known. If a real mass formation emerges, then something happens, something very specific happens in certain people, which is referred to as mental surrender. People who were convinced anti-totalitarians or anti-fascists, or no matter what, very often suddenly become fascists themselves as soon as a fascist mass formation emerges, just because they don't have the mental energy or the psychological strength to prevent that, or all the energy is sucked away from their mental representations and invested in only this limited set of mental representations that is shared by the group. So in many people, I know personally many people who wrote articles. Many people I know a few people who wrote articles about the dangers of technocratic totalitarianism, about the dangers of extreme collectivism and conformism. And then the Corona crisis started. And in the blink of an eye, they conformed to the mainstream narrative and they declared everyone crazy who didn't go along with the mainstream narrative. So that's the strange thing. And in my case, exactly not the opposite happened, but something different happens. I had exactly the same experience as the one that you described. And I talked about it in numerous podcasts before this one, that in the beginning of the crisis, I realized immediately I will speak out. I have no other option. And I will continue speaking out, no matter what it brings to me, or no matter what the consequences are. I just immediately knew if I don't speak out now, I will never have to speak out. And I will do it. I will just do it. And I started to speak almost without, I didn't have the feeling that I choose for it. I knew it. I will speak out.
Right. In my case, I would say I had that discussion with myself decades ago, right? I think in part, in my case, growing up as a Jew, as close to the end of World War II as I did. I was born in 1969, so a quarter century later, but nonetheless close enough that it was on people's minds. Many people I knew had seen it. And my basic feeling was I looked at all of the people who waited too long to speak out, who did something that leaves me frustrated even hearing what their response was. And my thought was, I will not go along with such a thing, right? Even at the cost of my life. I would much rather take my best shot and not be left with the question of why didn't I do more than to be stuck. And so anyway, at the point that you get to the thing, the choice is just made.
Yes, in my case, in my case as well, I think, because my family also has this, tradition of speaking out no matter what the cost is. Certain people in my ancestors did that. And I also think that like when I started to work at university, I saw how many flawed research there was. I immediately started to review it, and I tried to show what the problems were with this kind of research. And after 2 years at university, 90% of the people was very angry with me, and the other 10% really respected me. And I had this also there. In that period, throughout the last 20 years, I really became used to having 90% of the people against me and trying to continue to speak out in a very quiet way without trying to hurt anyone and being respectful to as much as possible. But still, I always refused to shut up. And when the Corona crisis started, I knew, look, this time I will speak in public space. I used to speak out only in the academic world, but I knew this one I will speak out in public space. And I don't know if that was also something that you experienced, but while I continued to speak out, people were throwing mud at me here in the Belgian newspapers. It happens all the time, even now. Constantly, there are, if the mainstream media talk about me, it's always in a very negative and condescending way. And but as I practiced and as I tried to continue to speak out without really becoming aggressive myself or without just calm and quiet, I really had this feeling that I felt as if a very warm and soft power grew stronger in me. And this experience in itself, for me, compensates for everything that I have lost in the crisis, which is not so much. I have been excommunicated from certain groups at university. I won't be too dramatic about it. But still, no matter what I would lose, I would want to give it, if I have this phenomenon in return, that you feel the soft power that is increasing in myself. And that for me is the essence of life, actually.
I agree. And I wish I knew how to convey what you're describing to a larger audience. I will say it's very interesting to hear that you have polarized the institutions you've been part of. I've had that same phenomenon. I've polarized every institution I've been a part of.
Mm.
And, when people who haven't had that experience hear it, they think, what, how terrible that you're polarizing. And the answer is no, I want the respect of the people that I think their respect means something, right? If you polarize an institution and all of the people who are, uh, phonies or corrupt or cowards, if they all, line up against you, and the people that you actually admire are like ready to acknowledge, yeah, you make sense, then the answer is, well, what else would you have done? Do you want the respect of people who aren't respectable? I don't, right?
Mm.
And so yes, what you are describing, what I think I have also experienced, is a training program for something. It's a developmental experience that generates certain characteristics that, if you have them,
Mm.
you're not eager to trade them for something else, right?
Mm. Indeed.
Right. I
Mm.
mean, I feel the same way in some sense about, I have what people describe as dyslexia. It interfered with my ability to do normal schoolwork, but I don't look at it as something that I lost. I looked at it as something that forced me into patterns that I wouldn't know what to do without. And so, anyway, yeah, the path of somebody who polarizes institutions is not necessarily fun hour to hour, but viewed on a long time scale, it's very clarifying. And I wish more people realized that and didn't fear uh, causing people to reject them.
Mm. Yes, yes, yes. I agree. I agree. There is this, in the Talmud says, if I'm not mistaken, if a human being uh, does not speak, does not articulate the words that emerge in him or herself and that seem to be honest and sincere words, then he will slowly start to lose his soul. And I do believe the opposite is true as well. If you practice and if you constantly try to articulate the words that you consider to be sincere and honest words, no matter what the consequences are, and no matter how the group reacts to it, then you will slowly start to be more aware of your own existence as a human being. You will start to feel stronger. You will feel your real identity. You will be less in need of all kinds of ego and fake identities. And I think for me, the human being uh, is intrinsically dependent on the quality of his speech. I think that the quality of our speech, and then I don't mean the aesthetical qualities, but the sincerity and of speech and the courage of your words um, determines in a straightforward way the strength of your soul and the strength of your mind, I think. And I think the better we realize that, the more we know that maybe we should tolerate that they take everything away of us in the end. But we should make sure that they don't take away our humanity, and that if we have to die, that we die with our principles and not without. Um, uh, that's something that I became much more aware of during this crisis. Like what is important and what is not important in this life here. Um,
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. And at the risk of tarnishing it, I will put it in what I take to be the evolutionary context. People are often prone to, ask, well, what's really special about humans, right? And they come up with all kinds of things. But really, in the end, it is speech. And the reason that it is speech is because that allows two minds to share ideas, abstract ideas. And this is the core of what we do that other creatures cannot, right?
Indeed, I agree.
So anyway, in saying the quality of your speech and the integrity of it, and I would argue the capacity of it to convey important nuance, you're really talking about the thing about us that uh, unites the individual with something else, right? Speech, yes, you can talk to yourself, and I think a lot of us who care about speech probably do. But the point is, to say that your speech is important is to imply that your relationship, the integrity of your relationship, and your capacity to interact with somebody in a deep, high bandwidth fashion is also at the core of, the most meaningful element of being human. And I 100% agree with that.
Yes. Indeed. I think that our relationship, the social bond between humans, is always intrinsically linguistic in nature, because we have no other option than to constantly try to interpret the other. The expressions on the face, everything is interpreted by us. We have no other option. We constantly do. And so it's indeed, we are linguistic entities for each other. and we can only connect and to each other through language, or the nature of our connection is linguistic, intrinsically. Yes, I think the art of speech is the answer, I think, to all totalitarianism.